Dan, I'm a junior doctor currently living and working in the UK, and today I want to talk to you about what happened to me last week, which is probably every healthcare professional's worst nightmare.
Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry I have to wake you. You a doctor?
That's right.
I was having some well-deserved annual leave, and me and my girlfriend went away to Madeira. An awesome time, but it was on the way home that we got into a bit of bother. For those of you who don't know anything about Madeira, here's 30 seconds on Madeira. Madeira is an archipelago in the North Atlantic Ocean. It is literally in the middle of the ocean. It is Portuguese, very mountainous, very hot climate, and the main two industries are tourism and then banana farming. It's famous for Cristiano Ronaldo. He is literally everywhere, but it's also famous for Madeiran wine, fruit punch, amazing hiking, fishing, and whale watching. Anyway, back to the story. Essentially, we'd had a great holiday, been really lucky with the weather, we'd handed the hire car back, and we were now waiting at the airport for our flight. Literally Charlotte's highlight of the holiday. We boarded the plane, we're flying with BA, we're about 3 hours into the flight, both went to the bathroom, and that was when I saw an air hostess holding a defibrillator in her hand. So at this point I was just like... Then the next 10 seconds were me trying to figure out how I was going to introduce myself and offer my help. I did the very British thing and said, "Is that passenger all right?" rather than, "I'm a doctor, can I help?" And they said, "Yeah, we're managing, unless you're a healthcare professional." And I sort of just smiled. Then that was it. I was sort of being escorted down to see the patient, and I didn't get to go to the toilet until we landed. So I don't want to talk too much about the patient on here. Essentially, they've been on holiday, had a nice time, and then over the last couple of days before their flight, they'd not quite felt themselves, and then they'd become unwell during the flight. I was pretty lucky, to be honest. It was only about 40 minutes until we landed in at Heathrow. The patient was definitely quite sick, but they weren't peri-arrest. So I just did my best really to assess the patient first, and we didn't really give that many treatments. I was able to check their blood sugar. I also managed to do an ECG on a family member's Apple Watch. I managed to find that they were in atrial fibrillation, which diagnostically was quite useful. So the whole time we were only about 30 minutes away from landing, so that was always quite reassuring in the back of my mind. And speaking to the air hostesses afterwards, this is not an infrequent thing that happens, especially on certain routes. I had not considered being in this position ever before, and I learned quite a lot, to be honest. I thought it'd be quite useful to share some thoughts, share some potential tips. So the first question that I'm sure everyone is asking is, do you have to help? The answer is legally no, but morally I feel that you probably do have a moral obligation, and I definitely felt it. I just saw an air hostess with a defib, and that was an image that just felt so wrong. I certainly wasn't ever going to enjoy my flight if I just sat back down. However, looking into this,
A few moments later.
if you're British and a doctor, then the GMC actually state that you should help, and that's part of their good medical practice guidelines. The only caveats to this are if you're like retired and don't feel competent, or if like you're impaired. So I think alcohol would probably disqualify you from that. Just on that, the cabin crew were absolutely excellent. Thanks to everyone that did give me a hand. So then the next thing to consider is you're in a plane. What is it like to assess or treat a patient? And the answer is actually really difficult. So the first thing that I noticed was the space. So this was like a small plane, there was no business class, we couldn't transfer the patient anywhere. Basically, we just sat the patient in the chair. Space was extremely limited. I just knelt in the aisle and tried my best to assess the patient in the seating position. That is fairly difficult. The next thing that I realised was that the noise was really quite loud. That's fine, shout a bit louder when you communicate with the patient. But when it comes to listening to the chest, trying to listen to the heart sounds, I mean, I had no chance listening to them. If you find yourself in that position, just be kind to yourself. Just try and adapt. You're doing your best. And then the last thing is that there is even less privacy than there is in a busy A&E. So half of the passengers, as you can imagine, are sat facing you if you're in the middle of the carriage. Luckily, I wasn't right at the front. They've got nowhere else to look. So everyone is looking. Everyone can hear you because you're having to shout to be heard by the patient and to communicate with the cabin crew. So everything is very public. It is slightly intimidating, but what else can you do? You're on a plane. The next thing is the medical kit. You will have a medical kit on a plane. I don't think there's a standardized medical kit, and I think that may be a beneficial thing for airlines to look at. There were two kits essentially. There was a first aid kit, and that was fairly well done, and then there was a physician's kit, which is for a physician. So when I got into my physician's kit, like it was like a suitcase, weirdly, and in one half there was kind of all the things that you'd need to assess a patient, and in the other half there were drugs and fluids and needles and things. In the first half, it was fairly lacking. I had a very old stethoscope. I had a manual blood pressure cuff. We can't hear anything. I didn't have a pulse oximeter. I did have a glucose meter, and we ended up using that. That was very useful. I don't think I had a bag valve mask, which luckily I didn't need, but I equally didn't go looking for it. Maybe it was with the defib, but I kept the defib away. Didn't want to cause any undue distress. And then the second half, there was basically like a cannula, a couple of fluid bags and things like that, a few needles. There was like this false floor, and you literally lifted up this false floor and there was so many drugs. It was literally like an ICU sort of controlled drug cupboard. That was probably the most anxiety inducing part of the whole assessment for me. There were some obviously crucial drugs there, lorazepam for seizures, things like adrenaline for anaphylaxis or cardiac arrest. So definitely some very useful drugs in there. But I think that was very well stocked comparatively to the other half of the medical kit. I think unless you were sort of an ITU reg or a consultant, you probably wouldn't jump to start using those. Maybe on a long haul flight, if you've got, you know, someone talking to you down on the ground, you might. I don't think many doctors would feel that comfortable. So yeah, the medical kit was a bit of a mixed bag. I was pretty lucky, like I said, the patient wasn't peri-arrest, they were sick, but also the history was quite clear. It was fairly obvious what was going on, and for that reason I felt like fairly in control and in my own sphere of competency. I just gave quite a lot of reassurance. I think just having someone that actually knew what half the stuff was, you know, half the battle, and we just got to land and handed over to the ambulance staff. But I guess in that situation, all you can do is try your best. Having a little read into it, there's something called the Good Samaritan law, and that protects you fairly well. And the whole time the cabin crew were telling me, oh doctor, you will be protected, and I think that is actually fairly true. I haven't gone into it loads. Rohan has now done 2 videos on this very topic. If you're more interested, he's very clever, very eloquent, so go check his out. Comment below if you have had to deal with this situation where you've had a patient on a flight. Subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.